Is Chris Hughton to blame for Ghana failing to win against Egypt? I don't think he is, to be honest. Although I think you could go back and say that the squad that he picked, both the matchday squad, but more importantly the wider squad for the tournament, are potentially partly at fault for the draw and Ghana failing to beat Egypt. I think a big problem and a big issue on the day was when Majida Shamiri went off. Ghana didn't have a press-breaking midfielder who they could bring on and replace him. That meant that Egypt didn't have to be very circumspect about pressing aggressively because they didn't have any fear that Ghana could break their press. I think that was potentially an issue. Additionally, sort of the lack of a target man you could point at as well, the lack of a kind of a winger type player, a number 10 type player who could potentially play midfield or at least reinforce midfield and break the press in those high pressing scenarios were other kind of issues that potentially contributed to Ghana not being able to win and not being able to deal with Egypt's press. But I would say otherwise, I would say Hughton's hands were pretty tied. Obviously, Ashimiri, I think, went off injured, so he had to bring him off. And I think, obviously, the squad, he didn't have a replacement for him, but that was an enforced change. And I think, in that sense, I think it's more of an issue about squad construction as a whole rather than decisions that were made on the day, because I think the squad construction ultimately influenced the decisions that he could have made during the match. So I don't really blame him for Ghana not getting the win, and actually I think that his sort of positive, proactive squad selection gave Ghana the chance to win the game. I think they were more dynamic, they were certainly threatening in transition, and whilst I think their offensive cohesion wasn't very good, I think there is still the potential there, and I think by selecting that team, that proactive team, it gave Ghana a chance to build something of a platform and some momentum before playing Mozambique in obviously a must-win game in a couple of days' time. Can Ghana rely on Richard Ofori? Personally, I'm not Richard Ofori's biggest fan. I think he has his pros and his cons. I think he's a reasonable shot stopper. I think he's got quite a conservative positional style. He tends to stay quite deep on his line, and that has its pros and its cons. I think from a positive sense, it means that when shots are sort of poorly struck or poorly directed, he's normally got time and is in a good position to be able to stop them from going in the goal. And I think we've seen that in a couple of the games where strikers or wingers or attackers generally have taken shots that haven't been that well directed into the corners, have been fairly straight at him, and he's been able to deal with them fairly comfortably. But there's also issues in terms of his explosiveness and his agility. I think we saw that with the first Cape Verde goal, where it was a long shot that he wasn't able to use sort of the power step technique, which limited his reach and resulted in him only being able to parry the ball into the danger area. So I think that's kind of the other side to things, and I think there's been a couple of other times where we've seen that lack of agility and explosiveness. I mean, arguably the second Cape Verde goal, but also I think the disallowed goal that Egypt scored yesterday, where the ball was kind of poked back across the face of goal and sort of before we kind of flopped in the direction of the ball and missed it. But I think you'd expect kind of a more agile, explosive goalkeeper to actually get that ball. So I think there's potentially some noisiness in his shot stopping and inconsistency in that regard, which is concerning. Not to say that the other goalkeeping options are perfect in that sense, but I think Ofori has some limitations which potentially can be exploited or could be exploited as the tournament wears on. And I also think yesterday the bigger issue, to be honest, was his distribution. I think in the second half, when Egypt did start pressing, Ghana really needed their goalkeeper to be a reliable presence in possession, and whether that's being able to put his foot on the ball, bait the press and then pick the free man, or kind of generally be able to just play short and be involved in triangles with his centre-backs, to be able to just take the sting out of the press. I think Ghana just didn't have that in Ofori yesterday, and I think just when they needed him to do that and be that presence, he started shanking the ball from his goal kicks and generally just ceding possession immediately. So Ghana weren't able to build that platform. And I think if Ghana are going to go far in this tournament, they are going to come up against teams that press them, whether that's the Ivory Coast, whether that's Mali, whether that's Senegal, whether that's Morocco, Algeria as well. Those types of teams are going to press Ghana, and they're going to need more from their goalkeeper as a distributor and hope for potentially even as a shot stopper as well when they're able to get shots on goal. What does Jordan Ayew bring to the Black Stars? I think Jordan Ayew's biggest strengths are his sort of ability to receive the ball under pressure and help get the team up the pitch. I think he's fairly intelligent at identifying spaces, particularly in the half spaces, to receive the ball as a progressive receiver. I think he's pretty good at that. And then sort of where there is pressure, he's able to retain possession, win a foul. Obviously, is the very well-known one, but also kind of occasionally, well, or not occasionally, but link up. Generally, not particularly quickly, but link up with players around him and just get Ghana up the pitch. I think he also gives them a direct option if they do need to be kind of play more aerially. He's also pretty good taking the ball in his chest and controlling it in that way. He's a reasonable crosser of the ball from sort of those half space areas, so that's also useful. And obviously the other area that he does seem to be adding significant value is actually in his set piece delivery, which I think has been really high quality. And in tournament football, set pieces are so massive, because if you are good at them and you can get maybe 1 or 2 goals in 3 games from set pieces, I think that puts you sort of a reasonably well on the way to getting positive results in those games. But also, obviously, there's the limitations that people have talked about. I think he's not a particularly good goal scorer. I think he's not a very good creative passer, both because his vision can be deficient, but also because he's just slow to release the ball. And I think we've also seen that slowness to release the ball when Ghana are trying to progress, particularly Gideon Mensah on the left-hand side. The ball will come into Ayew, and Gideon Mensah will have timed his run very well to be kind of on the wrong side of the winger and free. And Ayew just holds the ball, turns to his inside, with his right foot, takes the touch towards his left, rather than just playing it around the corner to Mensah, who would then be able to carry and potentially threaten a team with that extra verticality, that injection of pace. I think that's starting to become more and more of a problem for Ghana. I think because it is impacting their kind of offensive cohesion, coordination, and timing, which isn't very good anyway. And I think if your key progressive receiver is causing you issues in that area, then I think potentially you may need to start thinking about a change at that position. The errors that cost Ghana. Look, I think the errors came at a difficult time. Egypt had been applying massive pressure to Ghana. Ghana's ability to retain possession had completely fallen off a cliff. In the first half, they were managing to string together about 4.36 passes per possession. The second half, that fell to 2.36. Right, Ghana just couldn't keep the ball, and Egypt were pressing them pretty relentlessly. Basically, had massively ramped up the intensity of their press. Their pressing actions had risen sharply, and I think that all created a bit of an atmosphere of panic in the Ghanaian team because they just didn't have the solutions to sort that out. And I think for the first goal, obviously we saw Inaki. Unfortunately, he was being diligent defensively, tracking his man, intercepts the ball, and then looking for kind of the safe pass back, seemingly, to Dennis Adoy, who just wasn't on the same page. And I think Adoy, I'm not sure he was even looking, I'm not sure, but certainly the ball obviously eludes him. And I think it was Mashaw basically runs on and slides it in. And suddenly Ghana are 1-1 and everything's looking terribly problematic because Egypt have been kind of rewarded for their pressure. And then sort of the chaos happens. Kudus goes up the other end, scores, and then Osman Bukari then also makes an error. And I thought Osman Bukari as well, very difficult situation. Again, being defensively diligent, helping his fullback out. There was also Baba was also close by at time, and the ball gets sort of played through, and Bukari is just about the first on the scene, just before Baba has to kind of take a slightly heavy touch to sort of first take the ball away from Baba to a degree, but certainly to take the ball away from Mashaw, I think. And then before, just as this sort of second touch is made, there's Trezeguet putting pressure on him as well. So it was difficult, and I think the players, it was an unfortunate situation that was a product of, it was sort of that multiplier effect of the pressure on them, and guys just not being on the same page, and in the case of Bukari, just unfortunate that Egypt's pressure was such that he was instantly pressed by kind of 2 players just after recovering possession. So it's tricky. I don't really blame them, and I actually thought it was really harsh that he got pulled off, because I think even after he was pulled off, his defensive application was there. He was helping Adoy out. He was communicating, and he looked reasonably threatening in attack as well. So, yeah, look, it's tough. Players make mistakes, and hopefully they can both be kind of trusted by Hughton, and hopefully they both recover. I think particularly Bukari, because I think they can still be very valuable players for Ghana in this tournament and moving forwards.